you.
For being here. So nice to see you all. Fairfield, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you also. Now I feel so tall in this one. I feel a little bit too tall. That's odd for me to feel too tall, but this feels too short. Do I seem too tall? Do I feel okay? Okay. Yeah, really. It's the only mistake I've found in God's universe is my height. I also want to thank all of you and say hello to all of you who are watching on live stream. Today is International Day of Peace. There's much to talk about: peace, politics, presidential campaign. Let's take a moment, first of all, to close our eyes. Just to center in on the peace that lies within our hearts. To remember the higher purpose of our existence. To gather together in the love that binds all things. And to dedicate ourselves to healing and to love. And so it is. We will meditate together in a little bit, but first I'd like to talk to you about some things. Some people are coming in. Wendy, are we getting more chairs? Or they're doing that, getting more chairs? Okay. I'm not only talking to all of the people on live stream, but I'm talking to people here in Iowa. I want to talk today about the fact that, as we all know, how insane is it that we have one day that we dedicate to peace? International Day of Peace, one day. Pretty much we could say that 364 days of the year seem pretty much dedicated to war, or at least we act that way. I'm running for president, as you know, and I'm running for president with a deep belief that, as Gandhi said, the end is inherent in the means. We won't be able to change the world unless we ourselves are changed, obviously. And we also will not be able to change the world through the auspices of a political system that is divergent from the goal that is what we wish to achieve. And so I believe, and I think many of us believe, that we have to get to the heart of the matter if we are going to transform this country. We have to go deeper than just addressing the symptoms. I think many of us believe that the agenda of Donald Trump represents things that we don't like. But at the same time, those things are but symptoms with a deeper cause. And with every situation, if you only treat the symptom and not the cause, then the symptoms will be back. They'll just morph into another form. If all we're trying to do is defeat Donald Trump in the 2020 election, the forces that gave rise to that opportunistic infection, to that malevolent symptom will be back even stronger in 22 and in 24. So we have to go much deeper than that. It's not enough to just say, oh, we're not going to go over the cliff. We need to get out of the vicinity of the cliff. And to do that, we need a new coalition in this country. It's not a coalition made up of Democrats versus Republicans, left versus right. Something bigger and more meaningful, much more grand, much more American is possible here. It's what Martin Luther King was talking about when he spoke of a coalition of conscience. Because neither side of the political spectrum has a monopoly on moral consideration. I think the average American is a good person. The average American is a decent person. That's my experience. The average American does ask, what is it to be good? What is it to live with integrity? What is it to be forgiving? What is it to be compassionate? My experience of the average American is not that we're off-center with the deeper inquiries about what it is to live a good life. But what has happened over the last few decades is that that level of questioning has become limited in too many cases to the purview of the personal self. And so we ask, what is it to live a good life? But without facing the fact that you also have to ask what it means that we are participating in a genocidal war, where tens of thousands of people in Yemen are being starved, many of them children, in a war that couldn't happen if the United States weren't giving aerial support to the Saudi Arabians, and which we're only doing for $350 billion. I think there are many Americans who would be disturbed by that. But we have gotten out of the habit of asking ourselves such things. We've gotten out of the habit of being true citizens. And we need to awaken, not only in order to defeat one president. That president is just a symptom of the fact that we were asleep. That opportunistic infection could not have gotten hold of us had there not been a weakened societal immune system. And that's what we all are. We're the cells in the immune system. It's not enough that the founders said the power's in your hands if we're not using it, if we're not exercising it. And your power is not in your hands if it's no longer in your heart. Not in your hands if it's no longer in your head. If the principles of self-governance and American democracy and all these aspirational, enlightened principles, and they are aspirational and they are enlightened, but if all they are is written on marble walls somewhere, written on parchment behind glass somewhere, but no longer in our hearts, then for all intents and purposes, they're dead. Because principles are only alive if they live in us. And when our principles are no longer in our hearts, and I'll tell you what happens, we become easy to play. And ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, we've become played. We've been played. But life really isn't just about what happens to us. Life is also about who we choose to be in the space of what has happened to us. And for many of us, on the right and on the left in this country, we know that when we're in a situation, and I think the point here is that this is as true of a country as it is true of individuals, because all that a country is a group of people. So whether it's a person or a country, if you know you're in trouble, and you know, wow, we're in a pickle now, and we are in a pickle now, we're going to have to do more than just change things on the outside. We're going to have to look deep. We're going to have to do the same thing in order to achieve outer peace that we have to do in order to achieve inner peace. I know I've been in situations, and I'm sure we all have. I want to pick up the phone and call someone to process with someone something that I'm going through that maybe I'll feel better. But something in me knows, you know what? There's no one left to call. You've already had those conversations. Now you need to go inside. And you're going to have to do the work. You're going to have to put the mirror in front of your face. You're going to have to ask yourself, what part did you play in all this? What was your part in these disasters? Because you can talk to a lot of people and say, well, 90% of it was their fault, Marianne. But you're going to have to look and ask yourself, what was the 10% of it that was mine? I'm going to have to see where I have been and where I have not been who I say I am. Where I am and where I am not living the principles on which I purport to stand. Where I do and where I do not have to atone for some things. And in the places where I need to atone for some things, where do I need to make amends? Where do I need to stop playing victim? Where do I need to envision a better possibility? Where do I need to let go of the past? And where do I need to be willing to change? That is what the United States of America needs to do. And that's why in the 21st century, the president needs to know as much about how people change as about how policies change. Because if all we do is change policies, as important as they are, but do not change the underlying dynamics that cause policy to be what it is, and does not understand the underlying levels and dynamics that will cause policy to change in ways that will be fundamental and will not just be easily repealed the next time there's a new president. That's what the 21st century demands in leadership. That's what the 21st century demands in citizenship. It's not the 20th century anymore. In the richest country in the world, 40% of our people live with chronic economic anxiety. In the richest country in the world, 43 million Americans are hungry. That includes 13 million children. In the richest country in the world. In the richest country in the world, we have millions of American children who go to school every day, asking their teachers if maybe they have some food for them. We have millions of American children who go to school every day in classrooms that don't even have adequate school supplies to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot read by the age of 8, then the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. In the richest country in the world, in what are called America's domestic war zones, we have children, and millions of them, who experience a level of PTSD. But this is not post-traumatic. This is present traumatic, triggered and re-triggered every day, that psychologists say is no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan and Iraq. We have a political system that has normalized their despair. They're not old enough to vote, so there's no constituency there. They're not old enough to work, so there's no financial leverage there. How can they compete with the cloud of all the corporate money that dominates Washington every day? But we think this country's going to transform and just ignore all that. You think that's going to work, do you? This country's been so irreverent towards the earth itself that we have contributed to a climate crisis so bad right now that if we don't take radical action, if we don't embark on a World War II level of mass mobilization to move from a dirty economy to a green economy, then in the next 10 to 15 years, we could experience a level of social collapse unseen in the modern era. Food shortages, entire swaths of countries, perhaps even entire swaths of continents, where the heat literally makes living there impossible, land that's uninhabitable, places where food simply cannot be grown. So great are the food shortages, the refugee crisis that arise from that. hundreds of millions, perhaps, of refugees trying to find some place to live, social collapse, economic crises, the likes of which we have never seen. You think we're going to just change all that with an incremental shift here and there, do you? You think we're going to be able to deal with that without a mass awakening and all of us experiencing the horror of really knowing how bad this is? Because it's only when we stand naked before the horror of how bad it is that we will awaken to the inspiration and the motivation to fix it in our time. We have a national security agenda that is driven basically along the principle of endless preparation for war. That'll do it. That we'll just back up into peace someday. $750 billion a year on a military budget, which is mediation, development, diplomacy, that's $40 billion. And then within that $40 billion, there's the USAID, which is long-term development and humanitarian assistance. That's $17 billion. And then there's another $1 billion within that State Department budget that's our peace-building budget. And our peace builders do the things that actually create peace. Our peace builders do the things which statistically mean there will be a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of conflict. Nothing that any of us would find surprising. Expanding economic opportunities for women, expanding educational opportunities for children, reducing violence against women, and ameliorating unnecessary human despair. Funniest thing about that, treat people right, you'll have more peace. Treat people right, and you'll have more prosperity. Those are the keys. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. So we should have an equally robust relationship between the peace builders and the military. The U.S. military should have every dollar it says it needs in order to secure our legitimate needs. But anybody who thinks that our military budget is based only on what the military says they need is either willfully or unwillfully ignorant of what's going on in this country. There are hundreds of billions of dollars, some say even up to $300 billion, that go above and beyond what the military says they need just to feed the profit margin of defense contractors. That means, ladies and gentlemen, we just make a whole lot of money on ways of war. The richest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world. And we keep feeding the machine of brute force and withholding from the agencies of soul force. And you think the universe is going to let us get away with that forever. Thomas Jefferson said, "I tremble for my country when I consider God as just and that his justice will not sleep forever." But it's even worse than that. We have a presidential campaign, and only 2 of us even mention that. But that's going to win everything for us, you think? That's going to really change things. A campaign, a conventional political conversation where we don't talk about the things that are really, really uncomfortable. We don't have to. We just talk about what they say we should talk about. We become Stepford citizens. And we think we're going to be able to really transform this country without looking at those shadows underneath. You can't change a country any more than you can change an individual life. You cannot have the future you want, whether you're a country or an individual, unless you're willing to clean up the past. We're a good country and we're good people. We have some really, really bad stuff in the past. And we've cleaned some of it up. This is not to denigrate or in any way to minimize the struggles or the successes of our generation, the generations before us, black or white. But when it comes to the history of race in the United States, even though I don't believe that the average American is racist, the average American I do find and I do believe is woefully ignorant about the history of race in the United States. But what I do find when I travel this country, because we're a good people, what I find in the whitest states in this country is that when people do get that little American history class that we all maybe learned but didn't learn all of it, and even if we learned all of it, it was so long ago, and nobody really is out there talking about it, although we need to talk about it. The first slaves were brought here in 1619. Slavery was not abolished till 1865. That 250 years of slavery was followed by another 100 years of institutionalized violence against black people in the United States. What do you think lynchings were, if not domestic terror? What do you think Ku Klux Klan was, if not domestic terror? The black code laws by which Southern legislatures ensured only subpar political and social and economic opportunities for black people. In 1964, the United States Congress signed and the President passed and the President signed the Civil Rights Act. Very important. That dismantled segregation. In 1965, Congress passed and the American President signed, Lyndon Johnson signed, the Voting Rights Act, which gave black people equal access to the polls. Now being chipped away at by the John Roberts Court since 2013, which is why we have all these voter suppression efforts. But I think we would all agree that if you have been kicking people, if you've been kicking people to the ground, and I think we would agree that 350 years of kicking people is kicking them to the ground, you have a moral responsibility. And that moral responsibility does not end with, I stopped kicking. Then you gotta say, here, let me help you get back up. Germany paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations after the Holocaust. Doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. In 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, whereby to every surviving prisoner of the Japanese internment camps, the United States government gave between $20,000 and $22,000. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a turbulence, there is a racial turbulence that all we do is pass one generation to another. I want to preside over a season of repair in this country. Americans are hardwired for great things, not small incremental things. Reparations and race-based policies. Race-based policies is economic restitution, but in a way it's a continuation of the same paternalistic patterns. I messed with you and now I'll tell you how I'm gonna fix you. Reparations is different. It carries moral force because it carries an inherent mea culpa, an inherent acknowledgement of a wrong that has been done, of a debt that is owed, and the willingness on the part of a people to pay it. CBS did a study. If black Americans who have the same level of professional and educational achievement as whites earned as much money as whites, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. So let's be very clear. If we pay between $200 and $500 billion to be dispersed over 20 years to a reparations council made up themselves of descendants of slaves, so that it's theirs to decide, within a stipulation that the U.S. government means projects of economic and educational renewal. This will not be a debt. This will be an asset. This will be a benefit. This will be an economic stimulus. And even more than that, our generation will know we had a problem, and on that and on a lot of things, we rose up and we fixed those problems. We've had a lot of problems in our past because we were born out of a profound and ironic dichotomy. On one hand, our Declaration of Independence establishes that all men are created equal, that God gave all men inalienable rights of life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness, a profound repudiation of an aristocratic system. But 41 of the signers, 41 of the 54 or 56, I forget which, 41 of them were slave owners. So we've always been this polarity. Every generation has played it out. Every generation has had those whose hearts are enlivened and ablaze with the possibilities of a society in which anybody can be who they are, pursue happiness the way they want to pursue happiness, spread their wings, be whatever, whoever they want to be, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. That is so profound. It is so radical. It was radical in 1776, and it is radical today. But there have always been, from the very beginning, and there are today, just like in every generation, those forces which do not find that idea attractive, usually for their own economic purposes, and who have been willing to do even the most heinous and wicked things to make sure those things do not come to pass. But if you look at the narrative of American history, we tend to self-correct. We had slavery, but then we also had abolition. We had the oppression of women, but we've also had two major waves of feminism and the women's suffragette movement. We had segregation and institutionalized white supremacy, but then we also had the civil rights movement. This is the thing, ladies and gentlemen. In none of those cases did the U.S. government wake up one day and decide to correct itself. The U.S. government didn't wake up one day. They're the problem. They're not the answer. The U.S. government didn't wake up one day and say, hey, let's end slavery. No, it was the abolitionist movement. People rose up and people stepped in. The U.S. government didn't wake up one day and say, let's give women the right to vote. That's not what happened. With the women's suffragette movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. And with the civil rights movement, the U.S. government did not wake up one day and say, let's desegregate the American South. That's not what happened. With Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's the same situation all over again. We're not the first generation to have to face these iterations of basic royalism and aristocratic functioning by which a few people claim entitlement to the basic resources of a country while everybody else has to struggle for the space that they're squeezed into. Well, this is not the first generation to have to face this. Let's just not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes to get this country back on track. But we're told to believe that only people whose careers have been entrenched for decades in the limitations of the mindset that drove us into this ditch should be considered qualified to lead us out of it. Well, that's for you and me to decide. For you in Iowa. It's really for you to decide. And that's where this generation stands right now. We can make some change. We can make some changes in policies, and that'll be good. But like I said, if that's all we do, and we must do that, I'm certainly signed up for that. But if it's all we do, they'll be back, because we're not getting to the heart of the matter. And as a presidential candidate, I submit to you that Donald Trump has ushered in an era of political theater, and we will not be going back. This president is a phenomenon, not just a politician. And in order to defeat him at the polls, we will need a phenomenon of our own. That's not an individual. That's an uprising of consciousness among the American people, an awakening to what is happening. And when we do that, when we once again imbibe, you know, in the Jewish religion it says every generation must discover God for itself. If we as a generation say, all men are created equal thing, we mean that. All that, God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We mean that. That issue about how governments are instituted to secure those rights, we mean that. And then really the juicy part, if government's not doing its job, it's the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Now, I am certainly not saying we should abolish it, but you better believe we should alter it, and we should alter it quickly. John F. Kennedy said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable." Whether you're talking about those millions of American children and what will happen to them in 20 years if we do not rescue them, when you're talking about the racial turbulence that is underneath the bottom of things in this country, when you're talking about this endless agenda for war that continues and continues and continues, and when we are talking about an irreverence towards the earth that has taken us to such an amazing crisis that if we do not deal with it, there is a possibility of our species itself not being habitable, oh, you better believe things are going to change. But I once read, it's not up to you what you learn, it's only up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. This country's going to learn a few things, and I suggest we learn them through wisdom. We learn them through nobility. We learn them through intelligence. We learn them because we woke up in time. Many people. Many people around this world roll their eyes at America. They just don't understand it. They just can't even believe it. They're thinking, what are we thinking? And it's kind of true if you look throughout history, sometimes Americans are slow to wake up. But as Winston Churchill said, you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they have exhausted every other option. So it's true. Sometimes, in fact, a lot of the time, for whatever reason, Americans are slow to wake up. But let me tell you something else. And all those people who are rolling their eyes about us right now, they know this too. When we do wake up, we slam it like nobody's business. Ladies and gentlemen, let's slam it now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, look at you. And so today is the International Day of Peace. Quite a week with Greta Thunberg, the climate strike, International Day of Peace, a lot of resonance. We know what happens when some people with some racist and bigoted and homophobic and anti-Semitic, xenophobic, Islamophobic ideas get together and then wrap all that collective energy up in a political container. We know how dangerous that is. But it is nothing compared to what's going to happen in this country when we take conscience and mercy and love for democracy and love for our earth and love for our children and love for future generations and love for each other and wrap that up into a political container. Yeah. There are so many more people in this country who love than who hate. There are so many more people in this world who love than who hate. But the haters hate with conviction right now. And conviction is a force multiplier. We need to love with as much conviction as some people demonstrate with their hate. And that's why we're here. If we're going to do that, we're going to have to do more than just love our own children. We're going to have to love children on the other side of town, and we're going to have to love the children on the other side of the world. And if we're going to do that, we're going to have to do more than just say, oh, I want peace, not war. But I really don't want to have to look at the military budget. I really don't want to have to look at the military-industrial complex issues. I really don't want to have to look at the money made by the nuclear industry just so that we build more bombers that drop nuclear bombs while children are so hungry in this country. No, we're going to have to get serious about peace. We have to declare peace. War is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. You don't just take medicine. You have to cultivate health. You can't just fight war. You have to cultivate peace. And so we come together today to do that. It's so wonderful that it's the International Day of Peace. Just like the climate strike yesterday, there were people all over the world. This is the power of the 21st century. All over the world, we are participating. And we are participating on the level that we know is where it all begins. We are participating on the level of cause. And in doing that, we ask not only for a more peaceful country, we ask for more peaceful hearts. And we are willing to do the work within ourselves that I've talked about doing for our country. So many people are pointing the finger at other people today, but the problem is the pointed finger. If I'm president, if you make me president, I'll tell you what I want inaugural day to be: a day of emotional amnesty. Let us have a day in which we all forgive each other so that we can begin again. So let us begin today with all the other millions of people. I'm going to lead us into a meditative place where I invite you to speak your word if your word needs to be spoken, with a sentence that begins, I see an America in which, or it could be, I see a world in which. It starts with the conceptualization of that vision, that idea, and you're speaking your word. If somebody else is speaking, please wait and try to speak loudly so that everybody here can hear you. And then when we can feel that we have spoken, when we have placed into the ethers those ideas, those yearnings, those hopes, those visions, then my friend Juliet will come here and she will lead us further in meditation. Entering into a place of peace and love within our hearts. The creative source from whence come all things good and true and beautiful. We speak our word. Whoever feels moved to begin, say with the truth and clarity of your heart, I see an America, or I see a world in which.
I see a world in which there's truly harmony and diversity. There's truly economic freedom for all and love for all people.
I see a world where the militaries around the world actually prevent enemies from rising in the first place to create victory before war.
I see a world where everyone breathes freedom.
where everyone knows that they matter.
I see a world where every single person can do what they do best without fear, without harm, and know that the resources they need to go forth in the world will be there for them.
I see an America and a world in which every child is valued, loved, nourished, and taken care of.
I see an America where people accept you smiling at them, and everybody is mobilized and smiling at each other.
I see an America where her citizens believe, have faith, and trust in the government to do the right thing.
I see a world where children are taught to love.
And I see a world of emotional intelligence that allows us to use that to think beyond our reaction conditions and truly see the love of the world.
I see a world of unity consciousness.
I see a world of justice.
I see a world where men and women are truly equal.
I see a country where speech is really free.
I see a world where people live from the wisdom of their hearts.
I see a world in which people are awakened. They're inspired by wisdom, love, and beauty, and they love the earth and other people and animals as they do themselves, and even more so.
I see a world of stability and of joy.
I see in America where women take their turn in this country.
I see a world where we can all participate to make it better.
I see a world where more and more educators teach children to learn their truth and to be very young, see their truth, and articulate how they can the world.
I see a world where everyone realizes the God inside and turns themselves.
I see a world with Marianne as President of the United States of America.
I see a world in which those who hold our planet and people on it as sacred are our leaders.
I see a world in which peace is taken seriously by the masses.
I see a world that is confronted with the same issues of economic and political justice. But instead of saying, we can't afford to do something about it, we say, let's think together about how we can do something about it.
I see a world where pain and suffering is released from every single soul on this planet Earth.
I see a world, I see a country where children don't need bulletproof backpacks.
I see a world where babies can be born naturally.
I see a world where we lean out of our vulnerability instead of our arrogance.
I see a world where inner beauty is valued more than materialism.
I see a world where every neighbor loves every neighbor as himself.
I see a world without fear. forgiveness prevails.
I see a world where our decisions are based on the values of friendship, compassion, and love.
I see a world where this will be nothing special, and that happens every day.
I see a world without greed.
I see a world that values trust.
I see a world where healing has replaced hatred.
I see a world of clean energy, where all the other species and animals on the earth and plants thrive.
I see a world where every soul is free to be who they choose to be.
I see a world where everyone and everything is peaceful and blissful.
I see a world where it's okay for men to cry.
I see a world where you're not classified as just strangers. I see a world where the waters flow free and are all safe to drink.
I see a world where we're celebrating life every day.
I see a world where television doesn't tell lies to your vision anymore.
I see a world with a clean ocean.
I see a world where everyone has enough.
I see a world where we don't have to live on Mars.
I see a country warming up, heating up, to a point where our veils will all fall, and we'll realize that warmth is the love of the earth, and with this, it will warm the rest.
I see a world where children are not turned into zombies.
I see a world where equality and love of the earth are normalized. I see a world where the power of God guards the fire of love in the heart. I see a world where we love our neighbors as ourselves. I see a world where people are experiencing humility and takes the world as part I see a world where everything in it recognizes its interdependence.
I see a world that chooses veganism as a part of the campaign to reduce harm against animals and loss of community.
I see a world with more mushrooms.
All of the words that have been spoken. Not totally sure about the last one. Just won't comment one way or the other. All of these words, all of these descriptions, all of these visions promote the vision of a world at peace. And we take this moment to remember that there are those watching who spoke their words, and people all over this world who on this day and in their own way are praying for peace, are standing for peace, and are striving for peace. On this day, Let us dedicate ourselves. Let us dedicate our lives. And let us dedicate our country to the purposes of peace, to all that is good, to all that is true. And as each of us, within our own hearts and in our own way, look to the creative source from whence peace comes, now we gather in that deeper place, in that perfect place, that place within the human heart, deep within the human psyche. We enter there. We enter there. We enter there.
Meditate for 10 minutes. Make sure you're sitting comfortably. I'll time the meditation. Let's close our eyes. We will stop meditating now. Take a few minutes to slowly open your eyes.
When we were children, we sang the song, "And crown thy good with brotherhood." Before we leave this place, let's just take a moment to wish each other well. Let's take a moment to wish well all the people who are joined with us via live stream. Let's just take a moment to wish all the people and all the sentient beings of the world. Let's wish them well. And let us bring our hearts and minds into alignment with the integrative view of the world that really will change things and really will bring peace. Let's have peace, let's have politics, and let's have love. Let's take responsibility for our individual behavior and for our collective behavior. As Americans, let's not just love our children. Let's have a U.S. Department of Children and Youth. Let's not just love our earth. Let's have a massive mobilization to save it and repair it. Let's not just wish or pray for or love peace. Let's have a United States Department of Peace. Let's not just wish descendants of slaves well or Native Americans well. Let's actually take reparative measures. Let's love the world, and let's kick ass. Thank you very much.